Okay, so this lecture is called The Plumbing. It is something of a mishmash of a lot of different topics related to biology, the biological underpinnings of sexuality that I think are important for you to know. As you know, I have not required you to do a ton of reading on this unless you self-assess that you need the review. You guys should have had a high school course and or an undergraduate course that give you this information. So basically, to some extent, this is up to you how much review you need to do. Okay, for the next class, you need to be able to identify both male and female internal and external genitalia. If you were actually in class, I would have you draw it just to see how well you could draw it and what parts you could label. And by the way, everything I require from you, I require also from myself, and I actually use in clinical practice. There is a basic level of psychology, of biology that psychologists need to know in order to help people. I want you to have a basic understanding about the influence of hormones on behavior and sex drive, and to understand some of the psychological ramifications of being dissatisfied with your body. Understand some of the psychological ramifications of being tested positive for BRCA, and understand the options available for men who are dissatisfied with their penis size. So again, just a refresher, why discuss anatomy and hormones in a psych class? Because it all relates with respect to sexuality. It's important to have, like I said, a basic level of knowledge for when you're talking with clients about what's going right and wrong with them. I also think it's good to have a sense of average development. So if somebody comes in to you and says, my penis is way too small, and they say, well, it's 2.5 inches soft, you can say, well, that's actually about average. So you have some sense of the level of distortion they're doing or not. It's important, foundational, and oftentimes my clients discuss anatomical issues in sessions. So it's important to be able to have as much knowledge as they do. So I roughly divide this lecture into anatomical female-ish issues. You know why I use the word ish. It's because I don't think of anatomical sex as binary. There are a lot of in-betweens, even though it's simpler and we like to think of it as binary. So I've roughly broken it into female-ish and male-ish issues. I had you look at some stuff about the clitoris for preparation for this class only because 20, 30 years ago, we were taught that the clitoris was only just a little button the size of a pea. I think that was usually the comparison they used. But now we know that it's actually a bigger organ than that. It's like a penis. It has a head called the glans clitoris, and it has a corpus cavernosum, and it surrounds the vaginal walls. And this is much like the penis that has sort of a spongy tissue that fills with blood when the person with the penis becomes aroused. And so there's really quite a direct analogy to the penis if you look at the clitoris. The fact that it is this big or that it is this size explains why it probably explains why some women can have orgasms simply through vaginal penetration. Here's a couple pictures of clitorises just to give you a sense of the different sizes and shapes and why I'm saying something as crazy as, I'm sorry, only one of these is a clitoris, and it's this one right here, but you can see it doesn't look that different from this micro penis here. And I'm trying to give you an idea here that why I make such a brave or bold statement that anatomical sex is not completely binary. There are lots of different sizes and shapes that cause me to say that. Here's some pictures of a vulva, being the external place with the lips and the vaginal opening, and you can just see how different it can look from one woman to another. I understand that today these would probably be shaved, or many of them would be, but this is just a lot of variability. I cover this because a lot of my students ask me about the G-spot and about female ejaculation. The colloquial term is squirting, or squirters. Some women call themselves squirters. I have not done personal research on this, but I've done a lot of secondary research on this. And like everything, there are some groups of people that uh, have a bit of a cause around female ejaculation and claim that this actually is a kind of ejaculate. It's not urine. It is a real phenomenon. But what I'm going to tell you is what the data says that I'm aware of. And by the way, there's not lots of government or private funding that's researching whether or not there's actually something called a G spot. And most of our data about things like this actually comes from sex workers who are willing to talk to us about their experiences. But at any rate, the research that has been done, and by the way, the G spot is supposedly it has its own organ, but it's really, there is no evidence that there's a separate organ, but it usually refers to the anterior or the front part of the vagina, the vaginal opening. When research have been able to put female, quote, ejaculate under a microscope, it looks really just like a mixture of some urine and some vaginal fluids. It is, of course, not sperm. So I think of this as a myth. There will be some people who say, no, it's not, and they can wave their flags and their banners. But in my reading of everything that I have looked at, it's maybe, and of course, there's so much variability. Some women more sensitive on their vaginal walls? Yeah, of course. Some people are sensitive on their elbows, and other people aren't sensitive on their elbows. But I don't think there's good evidence for an actual organ or for real ejaculation. But despite that, there are still sex toys marketed to the G spot. Here's one right here where it's supposed to both sit on your clitoris and also go inside your vagina and stimulate your G spot. Okay, so moving right along to male issues. I'm going to post this video I'm going to post this video about the British doctor under my video that I've made, but it's just a British doctor talking about penis size, and sometimes colloquially people like to refer to showers and growers. What that means is that there is more variability in the flaccid penis than in the erect penis. There's a lot of variability in flaccid penises. There are some that are quite small, and there are some that are quite large. But as soon as they become erect, there's much the smaller penises that, when flaccid, grow much more than the larger penis is flaccid. If that makes sense. And this is a video of a guy talking about that. Here's a penis cross section. This is the corpus cavernosa and the corpus spongiosa. Right here is the urethra, and there's a lot of vessels and veins running into the penis. Essentially, if you remember from class, all an erection is, it's not very romantic. It's just a bunch of blood flowing into the penis and filling it up and making it stiffer and longer and wider. It mostly fills up these corpus spongiosa right here. And so it's helpful to know this if somebody's talking about erectile difficulties, because it helps you to conceptualize how to fix these kinds of problems. This is my own private joke to me. I just think it looks an awful lot like Mr. Bill from old Saturday Night Live. See the resemblance? Okay. Because we're in Europe right now, a lot of you guys have not seen an uncircumcised penis. So here's a picture. You can see the foreskin right here has just been cut off to below the glands on the circumcised penis. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about what happens when we don't like our bodies. There's various ways in psychology to not like your body, and most of you guys have heard of when you don't like your weight or your body shape, and we refer to those as eating disorders for the most part. But there are people who have more of an obsession with one specific part of their body. There is some evidence in my mind, again, in my reading of the data, that these kinds of disorders fall under anxiety disorders. partly because people tend to obsess about them, much like OCD. Um, but also what's involved when we don't like a part of our bodies is often distortion. And by distortion, I mean a cognitive error where we see something as much more severe than most other people see that problem. So we see our nose is huge, and everybody else looks at us and thinks it's no big deal. Um, and here is something about extreme plastic surgery. We kind of start to get into this idea about plastic surgery with this, but I will post that below here. When we really don't like a part of our body, there is a diagnosis for that. And it's called body dysmorphic disorder, or sometimes referred to as BDD. It's a body image disorder, as you can see here, characterized by persistent and intrusive preoccupations with an imagined or slight defect in one's appearance. So it's an important couple of important things here is that it's persistent and intrusive, so you think about it a lot. And secondly, that it's an imagined problem, so nobody else notices it, or it's a slight defect, and so you distort it. Other people may see it and say, "Oh, it's not so bad," but in your mind, you've distorted the seriousness of it. People with body dysmorphic disorder can dislike any part of their body, although common parts to dislike are the hair, skin, nose, chest, stomach. I've treated somebody in the past who didn't like their skin, that's already on the list, didn't like their teeth. And for the person with BDD, the flaw seems significant and prominent, and often it causes a lot of emotional distress, difficulties in functioning. Maybe they don't smile because they don't like their teeth, or maybe they don't go out because they're afraid of what people think about their nose. In the DSM-5, or the latest manual in the States, this has now become classified as an anxiety disorder because it's more related to OCD than it is to other disorders that have to do with the body, which are grouped into another chapter called somatoform disorders. In managing BDD, we think about psychological treatment of it, so psychotherapy. People also point to cultural issues. I mean, you don't really, in cultures where large breasts aren't valued, you don't really see people who have distortions about their breast size. So there is probably a cultural component to it. And finally, there are also surgical remedies. You can, of course, give somebody a nose job. The problem is because there's so often distortion around the disorder. Sometimes you can do the surgery and the surgery doesn't help because even though you've changed the objective size or shape of the dissatisfying body part, the person still distorts. So sometimes what you find out if you recommend surgery is that they're just going to want surgery again and again and again. I'm going to stop the video here and go to the next one.